Okay, so hi guys. I'm here to run you through a quick tutorial of how I do the motion photos that I do on my screenshots. So we'll try to make this quick, but basically it's using radial blur, linear blur, smudge, and masks. Okay, so I'm using GIMP. I don't have Photoshop. But I'll just show you the techniques that I do to show off a little of that motion. Okay, so for example, you've got your screenshot. Try to get the best screenshot that you can with like anti-aliasing or like the biggest resolution that you can push. For others who can't uh, afford the anti-aliasing or the big resolution, you can also try to use an AI upscaler. Um, that's the case with me, and I use an app called Upscale. That's spelled Upscayl. So to bump up my photos to 4K. There are some weird artifacts because AI, yeah, but overall it's okay. So once you have your photo, once you're happy with your composition and I don't know the positioning and all that, the first thing I do is blur the wheels. And when I blur the wheels, I just really blur the wheel and not the tire. Uh, I feel that it makes the blurring a lot better because you can actually just go in and do some manual smudging on the tires. So the first thing I do is pick the uh, elliptical selection tool and then basically draw it over the wheel. Find your bottom boundaries, your upper boundaries, and your edges. Okay, so for in cases like this, like I don't know if you noticed, but the selection over here is inside the wheel and also here because that means the wheel, the ellipse of the wheel is tilted. So you have to tilt your selection as well. On GIMP, all you have to do basically is to find the center lines of the wheel. For the vertical, it's usually easy. You just match it up with the upper boundary and the lower boundaries. But for the edges, you'll have to imagine a center line that goes through the ellipse. And where that center line hits the wheel or the edge of the wheel, that's where you match your selection edge. That's where you put the limits of your selection. And then you press Shift R, which gives you the rotate menu. And over here, under transform, you'll have a choice of rotating either the layer or the image or the selection. And what we need is to just choose the selection because that's all we need to rotate. So click here once again, and you can just pull on one of the sides of the selection and just tilt it, rotate it, and until it matches. That's why it matters that you match the center line so that when you rotate it, the ellipse is of the same shape, just tilted. And then you press enter to get that selection in place. On GIMP, it takes a while, so you just have to wait. And then from here, we'll jump into the kinds of radial blur that I do. Okay, so anyway, while we're waiting for this, it's important to note that only Photoshop has an adjustable elliptical blur. On GIMP and on say like Paint.net and I think all of the other image manipulation apps or software, the elliptical blur is usually just or the radial blur is always a perfect circle. Okay, so now that you have your selection tool over your wheel, you can go to Filters, Blur, Circular Motion Blur. And this is what I mean when I say that it's not a perfect elliptical blur. If you put it to the extremes, you'll see that the blur is circular, which is going to screw up your image if you overdo it. because you can see it twisting because it's not a perfect ellipse. Because with an ellipse, you have a major and a minor axis, and GIMP just doesn't handle it the same way. Although to a certain extent, you can get that nice rotation. Okay, so with the circular motion blur, you can just play around with this handle to fix the angle, or you can go here, adjust it here, or even use these toggles, buttons, arrows to fix the angle. I don't suggest you muck around with the center X and center Y because basically you already have your ellipse centered on the wheel, on the face of the wheel. Okay, so you can either go with the default circular motion blur on GIMP, but I actually prefer using a plugin pack called GMIC QT, which you can download over the net and install. In this plugin pack, there is a plugin called an effect called Blur Angular, which I like using more because I feel it has a cleaner output than the default one. And here you can set the amplitude, which is like equivalent to the angle on the other blurring filter. So let's say 2.2. You set that. Okay, that's too much. Let's go for like 1.8 or 2. Let's do 1.6. Yeah. Okay. So now you have a spinning wheel. Okay. Problem is your wheel is spinning, but your tire isn't. So the best way to solve that is to just use the smudge button, the smudge tool, and just manually run it through the parts of the tire that have branding. If your tire doesn't have branding, then there's not much of a problem really. Okay, I think I overdid that. Okay, and I also use a smudge tool on the treads because some tire models have really prominent tire treads, especially on snow tires where the studs are very prominent. So there, now you have a spinning tire and a spinning wheel. Okay, for the front tire, as you can see, it's partly covered by the fender. So using the ellipse tool here is going to blur this part of the fender, which we don't want. So what I do here is use the free select tool and roughly just go over the shape of the wheel. It doesn't have to be perfect because basically the blur takes care of it. Just as long as you catch most of it inside the wheel shape. And there you go. And then we just go back to my angular blur, leave it on 1.6, press OK. There you go. To release the selection on GIMP, you just press Control-Shift-A. And then we go back to our little smudge tool. Give this a bit of a brushing. And you have spinning wheels. Okay, now for most, this should be okay, right? Like, it's realistic enough in that you can have a camera setting that'll keep everything completely sharp and still, but have the wheel spinning. But if you want a little more dynamism, a little more drama, then what we can do is just copy this layer. We make a duplicate of it. Just right click on the layer and click duplicate. And then apply a linear motion blur to this layer. So you click blur, filters, blur, and then linear motion. Okay, so for linear motion, I usually just use the stock GIMP filters. And let's just fix the angle a bit, bring it a bit lower because you have the action here is coming from the right to the left, and the left is a bit of an upslope. So you want your blur to be coming from this area headed to this area. Okay. And then I just leave it at the default length for now, because we're going to do something else later. Okay, so now that you have your blur, problem here is that now your car is blurred. So here is where masking comes in. Okay. We right click on the layer and add a layer mask. I can't fully explain, I don't have the time to fully explain what masks are, but generally you just, it's a tool for you to reveal or hide stuff underneath the layer. Okay, so we chose a white mask, and using a on all black color and the paintbrush, you click the paintbrush, we are going to reveal the stuff that's underneath, which remember is the non-blurred. Okay, so this is the blurred layer. If you take that out, that's the clear layer. Okay, so on the blurred layer and on the mask, selecting the mask, not the image, you just run your black paintbrush and that should clear it up, because you're basically revealing, you're taking out the top layer, taking out parts of the top layer and revealing the bottom layer. Okay. So what I'd like to do is just run it through the edge of the shape of the car. Roughly. And then there you go. Now for you to see the parts of it that you missed, you can just click the visibility of the bottom layer and it will show you the parts which you've missed. So that's why I like doing the shape of the outer car, the outer shape of the car first, and then just go in and paint all these other spots in. Okay, now once we're done with that, we are going to make some tweaks. Okay, there. Most of the time, I don't really go super sharp on the edges because uh, more often than not, real life photography, depending on your aperture, your shutter speed, and your focal length, and your panning technique, not everything is going to be in sharp focus. So there. Now you have a clear car against a blurry background. Okay. But we are going to go back in because as you can see, this background is blurred, but through the car window, everything is sharp. So since we use the black to reveal the layer underneath, we're now going to use the white to bring back some of that upper layer that we took out. And then to bring the blur back in through the windows. Just to unify that imagery of motion. And then for this little part where the names are, I'm just gonna go in using a smaller brush size, just clear that up. There you go. So that through the windows, you can still see the blur. And there you go. Now, if you wanted to bring it up a notch, you could duplicate this layer again, and then including the mask, and then go back in, filters, blur, linear motion blur, and then just apply a stronger amount of blur. Okay, and then clean that up. You clean that up by just going through to your mask again, and just running your paintbrush over it. Since things aren't perfect, you are going to have some artifacting, some ghosting, and it'll be up to you to get the detail work done on these parts. Like here, if we come back in with the white to heal this part, there you can undo some of that. But unlike real life, where the blurring is directional because you're panning in one direction, linear motion blur in GIMP uh, works in both directions. So you have it to the right and to the left. That's why you have these weird artifacts in the front. But it is what it is. Like if all you want to do is like put up a pretty screenshot and not recreate real life, then this will have to do. Yeah, but this is a start. Like if you really want to dig in and do your best work, at least you have a stepping stone right there. And that's it. Pretty much from here, I do some color corrections in another app called Photoscape X, where I do some cropping, some rotating, and stuff like that. But basically, that's the idea. You rotate the wheel, and then you blur the whole car, or at least the whole scene. And yeah, don't apply the linear blur to the wheel. That's why when we masked it, we cleaned up the wheel area as well, because you want the blur there. You want the radial blur there. You don't want the radial blur and then you do a linear blur on it. The radial blur should be okay. And that's it. Photoshop experts, feel free to chime in if you see something's wrong. That's all right. I just learned GIMP in the last month or so. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Hope this helps.